Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Cool Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheist United Studios. Joey, I happen to be terrible at memorizing lines. Something you learned firsthand when we recorded our little promo video for Amusing Jews. So in a way, it's a comfort to know there's a lot more to acting than memorizing lines. Of course, you have to do that too, but acting, according to Sanford Meisner, developer of the famous Meisner acting technique, who was, by the way, an amusing Jew himself, acting is doing things truthfully under imaginary circumstances. From a certain point of view, everything is an imaginary circumstance. Life is but a dream. And we have a dream guest with us today. If I could go back and tell my adolescent self that one day I'd be interviewing Principal Musso from Parker Lewis Can't Lose, I'd synchronize all my watches and wait for this moment.
We are truly excited to have Melanie Chartoff as our guest. Melanie starred on Fridays, a live comedy show that aired on ABC in the early 80s, and the hit 90s Fox show Parker Lewis Can't Lose. She played George Costanza's recurring girlfriend Robin on Seinfeld, and voiced Didi Pickles and her mother Minka on Nickelodeon's long-running cartoon Rugrats, and a whole lot more. Her first book, Odd Woman Out, Exposure in Essays and Stories, explores the risks of becoming an actor before becoming a fully realized human being. She currently coaches performers and non-performers in being more charismatic in their public and private encounters. Melanie, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Wow, that was beautiful. I'm tearing up. I actually am. It's a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
So I suspect our audience is probably most familiar with your work on Rugrats. Didi Pickles has a pretty instantly recognizable voice, and both her and her mother, Minka, sound very Jewish. We're wondering, were there any real-life people who inspired those characters?
My mother, I could describe with the exact same adjectives as the Didi Pickles character was presented to me, kind of wanting to do an excellent job and being repressed at the same time. So anxious with a kind of a blanket over it.
So it kind of sounded like my mother, only it was at 78 RPM, whereas I was 45.
So we have the same voice, only hers spins a little faster. And the deal was that I bought my mother a beautiful condo with the money. I split that with my sister, so she couldn't really complain. She was offended, however, by the portrayal of Minka, who was based on an amalgamation of different Jewish grandmothers I knew at the time. My mother did not like the depiction physically in the animation of either Minka or of Boris. It made her very frightened and paranoid that there was going to be a resuming anti-Semitism and that these would be tokens of that resurgence. So I kind of understand now her paranoia with the unfortunate resurgence of anti-Semitism. It's crazy. Why us? Why now? But anyway, it troubled her a great deal, and I think they've softened those characters in the drawings more recently.
Yeah, they are incredibly stereotypical. I mean, and it's perhaps most problematic because this is a children's program. You're presenting these images to young, impressionable kids. I was going to ask or just mention how humorous I think it is that the child psychologist that Didi is so infatuated with, Dr. Lipschitz. You know, that's a very instantly recognizable Jewish name, but it's also one of the funnier Jewish names. And I remember as a kid just thinking that was the most hilarious name in the world.
And these were all very loving send-ups of people in the producer and creator's lives. I mean, there was no ill intent at all. It was the most affectionate of send-ups. And I was very proud to incarnate them. I was very proud of my Jewish heritage. My grandmothers, both of whom passed away when I was very young, I still remembered their voices. And I have an audio tape of one of my grandmothers praising my performance as Khrushchev at the family Thanksgiving.
She was, darling, do the Khrushchev. I love the Khrushchev, please. Please, it's now, I'm not making fun. I want you to play the Khrushchev at the Passover Seder, too.
So these voices were still in my ears, even though they'd long ago left my life.
Speaking of Seders, too, the Passover episode of Rugrats, it's a mainstay, certainly a source of pride for Jewish kids everywhere, the Hanukkah one as well. So, for whatever negative imagery there might have been, I think the good outweighs the bad as far as Rugrats goes.
That's how I feel too. Glad you feel that.
Well, going from the familiar to the obscure, I recently discovered I would say, almost cult classic, Stooge Mania.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Yes, I was in that.
Yes. Well, I happen to be a Three Stooges fan. So I was going to ask you your feelings about it, but just for our listeners who probably aren't as familiar with Stooge Mania, 1986, kind of a cash grab as it appears to kind of use 4 shorts of the Three Stooges, recycle them in this movie about a guy who's obsessed with the Three Stooges. He sees them everywhere. Specifically, he sees them in these 4 public domain episodes, right? So there was no cash involved in using those. And you, of course, were the fiance in that. And the funny thing about it, I realized, is the one tape of the Three Stooges that I had growing up, the one right here, has those 4 episodes. Everyone I knew who had Three Stooges also had those 4 public domain episodes. This was distributed by the very famous Alpha video distributors. Like, these cheap companies were just having a field day. And the fact that, a creative team that did good work otherwise kind of glommed onto these episodes and made a whole movie about it. I just want your insights. It's kind of fascinating to me.
Well, Chuck Workman, who edited the film, was the master of montages. And I think the Academy Awards for several years featured like a montage of the best kisses in film history, montage of the greatest punches in animation history. I think this is what was his first attempt at a feature film. I may be wrong. Forgive me, Chuck. And I think since Singing in the Rain, where Gene Kelly dances with an animated mouse, there had been a few attempts at mixing one kind of footage with another. And so this was one of the first experiments with mixing old film footage with new. And of course, Zelig and Gump, Forrest Gump, many other films.
Yeah.
To do that too with great expertise. So I was happy to be in it. The pie fight was really fun because I knew I'd probably get hit at an early point in that filming. I hit myself in the face with a pie because I knew it wouldn't hurt quite so much. And another funny inside story about that is that Josh Mostel, who played the guy obsessed with the Stooges, and I had been in group therapy in New York just 3 years before. And when I was being brought out to Los Angeles, I left that group therapy, and when he and I both showed up on the set, I followed the therapist's rule that we were not to speak to one another outside of the group. And so for the 6 weeks we were filming, I would not speak to him. I would cut him off. I would kiss him in the scene, then I'd go into my trailer. And finally he knocked on my trailer one day and he said, "Melanie, we haven't been in group therapy for 3 years. I think we can actually engage each other in conversation." And it was kind of a relief because he was great. He was so much fun.
Yeah, Josh Mostel, of course, the son of Zero Mostel. And I think our audience may know him from Jesus Christ Superstar as Herod, and Billy Madison, the mid-90s Adam Sandler movie, as the principal in that movie. But also Sid Caesar was in Stooge Mania, which was kind of a surprise and an oddity. Did you get to interact with him?
No, I had just worked with Sid, oddly. Sid, my dearest old friend. We had done an event for a Jewish relief fund for Jewish relief in Hawaii, actually, and performed on a kind of a musical review that was thrown together for that night. So I'd met him and his wife. No, sorry I didn't get to work with him. That would have been a real career triumph.
Oh, absolutely. And he's actually quite well, always remarkable and really funny in that movie too. And you're great in it as well. It's sort of a good sport, I think.
That's nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of staying in the strange realm, Fox had a bunch of surreal, reality blurring, boundary pushing sitcoms and comedy shows in the 1990s. There was Married with Children, Get a Life, In Living Color, The Tracy Ullman Show, Herman's Head, and of course, Parker Lewis Can't Lose. When you played Principal Musso on Parker Lewis, did you feel you were on the cutting edge of television?
I didn't know what it would be until I saw it shot, you know. I think our directors, our producer were very forward thinking, and they wanted to make use of every device that was coming so readily out in those years. There were a lot of breakthroughs. So there were shots later used in many other comedy films of them, us opening refrigerator door and the camera was inside, and they see the most intimate of moments. They'd shoot up my nose. Sometimes they'd go right into my face, the most unflattering of angles for a mature woman. They also used morphing, which I had never experienced seeing in a film, where I would morph into a character. My earrings would disappear and I'd suddenly be a male face. So it was really fun to be a part of that. I've kind of been fortunate in falling into a lot of really cutting edge programming in my career, looking forward to more. But yes, I didn't know until I saw it realized what it was going to be. I knew it was going to be different because the descriptors for Ms. Musso were apoplectic, very extreme. And I thought this is going to be like an animated feature. If what I'm reading in the script is correct, there's a special effect in every single scene. I'm smoking, like smoke is coming out of my ears. My shoes have sparks coming out of them. So I knew it was going to be a rough shoot. And it was. It was sometimes 14 to 16-hour days because there were so many special effects. But it came out very well. It was very, very clever, I felt.
Right. And that was an interesting moment in time for special effects because it was sort of some of those practical effects that took so long to shoot, as you're saying, and then also the kind of post production stuff, the morphing and all that stuff, kind of an interesting transitional period for surrealist filmmaking, I think.
Yeah, and I think all our guest directors were practicing for their next feature. And so they
Yeah.
used us like guinea pigs, but we really loved being used. So it was.
Yeah, I always felt that, the generic kids, the ordinary kids were watching Saved by the Bell, but the kids who were cool were watching Parker Lewis Can't Lose.
I'd like to think so. It was a very hip demographic. I've been in a lot of shows that had that double entendre, like for adults and kids, like Rugrats, for example. It wasn't just for the babies. There was also a lot of inside jokes for parents. And to this day, those children of those parents come up to me and say, my own child is watching the Passover special this week, and I'm so proud that I have a copy of that. It's become a teaching tool for Hanukkah and Passover, Kwanzaa too, apparently now, for a lot of families.
Well, I really did enjoy reading your very candid, vulnerable, relatable, entertaining, heartbreaking collection of essays. Odd Woman Out. I have my copy here
Oh, do you?
for
Oh,
the viewers.
I'm going to have a copy myself.
Yeah.
Now I'm the odd man out. I'll get the book, I promise.
Oh, I think you'll enjoy it. You're a brave man to read it, Jonathan, but it actually is for men as well as women. Although it's written from a very intimate female point of view, I think my male friends are learning a lot from reading it about
Absolutely.
how they were perceived when they thought they were in control and power.
Yeah, that really came across. And the kind of public face that you would put on, and the private emotional turmoil and all of that kind of stuff. I'm wondering, given that, why you maybe turned to autobiographical writing at this stage, and what you hope the reader gets from reading this book.
Well, there's a lot of downtime for an actress my age. And in that time, rather than go mad, I have to express my creative compulsivity in another way. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been writing a lot for Chicken Soup for the Soul. I've recently had a piece published in the New York Times, a lot of humor magazines on the internet and off the internet. And I had a lot of these stories that I felt might be comforting for women of an older year. because I didn't meet my husband until I was 65. And I'd never been married. And here I am married. I have stepkids. I mean, I have the whole mishpucha, you know. And for it to happen so late, I think, and my talking about that gives a lot of women hope. So, because the book culminates so happily, starts out in a very distressed way, but culminates in a very happy, not ending, but proceeding. Um, it felt like the right time to do it. Also, I had sold the book to a small publishing house, and then when pandemic happened, they shut down. So I had to keep shopping it around. And beginning of 21 seemed like the right time for it to come out, because how long we'd be in and out of these shutdowns, and people needed something to read and to listen to. I also perform the audio book, which is 8 hours long. It's the trip to San Francisco and back if you're driving in California. It's really good company. I do all the character voices. I do Henny Youngman. I do Ed Asner. I do my mother, my agents. And I sing in it. So I had a really good time recording it. And there's a special right now for Valentine's Day. If people write me at my email address, I'll give them a free code to that audiobook for Valentine's Day. If they promise, if they're touched by it, to laughter or tears, they will write me a good review on one of the many sites where it's located now.
That's terrific. And we can share that address with our audience.
That'd be great.
Excellent. So you mentioned the celebrities that you've sort of crossed paths with within the book. The Ed Asner story is really remarkable. We don't have to share it now.
Yes.
We want the people to read the book. But I do want to ask, just because you mentioned it in passing, back in your Broadway and off-Broadway days, Bud Friedman, the improv club owner, would have you open and close for people like Andy Kaufman and David Brenner, I think you mentioned as well.
And then out in California, Robin Williams, and
Wow.
closing after him, following him was no easy feat.
I can imagine. I'm actually, as a lot of people are, fascinated with Andy Kaufman. I was kind of in my college years, probably when the kind of Andy Kaufman resurgence, the movie with Jim Carrey and all that stuff came out. And I've always been curious, like, what is he like behind the scenes? I don't know if you had any insight into that or any encounters with him.
I knew Andy from New York. I wasn't first tier friends. I'd say I was third tier. And when he came out to LA, he used to take me for macrobiotic food at this wacky restaurant called Inaka, which had, burdock root and strange tasting fungi and molds and things like that. And he was talking a lot about transcendental meditation in those days. To me, he was just a really nice Jewish boy, very shy, much more appealing on stage, very charismatic on stage, but off stage, at least with me, a very kind of introverted, nice boy was the role he played. So when he came on Fridays that first time and really blew out the show, I was a bit shocked, in all honesty, a bit pissed, because I was a Broadway professional. We all knew the lines, knew the blocking, and I felt, in my opinion, it was kind of a put down of the show that I was on. So I knew everybody supported it because it was like a reality TV breakthrough. We got the best ratings for that show when he broke out. You can see that incident on YouTube, by the way, the uptight wife. And we knew at the beginning of the show that he was going to break the fourth wall and break out of that scene. We didn't know how he'd do it, but we all were told to improvise, stay in character, just go with it, roll with it, gang. And we did. And it became a historical moment.
Yeah, talking about being on the cutting edge of cultural moments.
Yes. Yeah, it was wild. The crew were not in on the joke. So they leapt to the actor's defense and grabbed Andy, and it looked like they were going to deck him during the commercial. Luckily, Jack Burns, our director-producer, pulled them off, but they were hell-bent for leather. They were really angry and incensed, as I was too. I was going along with it, but I was not proud.
So, a little bit of a tougher question. From what you write in the book, you had a rather strained relationship with your father, so much so that you were overjoyed when your parents finally got divorced when you were 42. I'm wondering if you turned to acting as a way of escaping this messy reality.
Oh, I've been acting all along. I'd been acting during their whole marriage. So I didn't turn to acting. I could only turn to acting when they hired me. I'm I'm not in a position where I can do anything but audition for jobs. But it was very good to have that career to turn to. I'd say I was pulling for my mom. This was the first time she'd really struck out on her own for a life. She had never lived alone in her life. And I was very concerned for my father. He'd had a stroke. He did not recover well. He couldn't believe she had left him. He didn't believe she could get along on her own. So it was a real reckoning for my father. But within a couple of years, he started a swinging 70s singles group in New Haven. And he was dating. And I think he was much happier, much better off. To complain about my mom that she chewed so slow. So all the women that he was now seeing chewed faster. This was a major feature for him. He wanted to be able to get through a meal in an hour if he could.
Do you mind if I read a little bit from your book?
Oh, no, I'd be honored.
Okay, because related to that, one of the passages that really struck me in your essay on gray areas, when you talk about this childhood and your father's interactions with you and other women and so forth. Just want to share a bit about that. My father thrived on pranks, adding slapstick into every interaction he could, ridiculing my mother, belittling my sister, making jibes and jokes at my expense. This was hilarious for him and for his father and father-in-law. It was not so funny for the females, whose smiles were more like winces. To some extent, I mean, to me, reading the book, that's kind of like a motif. The outward kind of smiling, the grin and bear it, and then the private sort of trauma and dealing with that stuff. Kind of to Joey's question about acting and how actors maybe process that in their work and kind of maybe escape reality by creating an alternative reality, that kind of thing. I don't want this to be a heavy subject, but it just seems to be such a prominent theme in the book.
Well, I think actors and comedians, we have more scar tissue than normal people. And I'm not a method actor or a proponent of using your own wounds, to create characters. But there are more sensitive spots in us, and we can bring those to life, perhaps in a more facile manner than people who are not so damaged. I haven't really played a woman like my mother or myself, victims. But I certainly recognize that work in others and know that the women may have some grounds for identification with those roles. I did actually write a movie based on my mother's escape from my father. I've been trying to get Diana Wiest to read it for years. She'd be perfect. But unless I actually have a cash offer, her agents won't even read it. They won't even allow her to read it. So it's been very frustrating. It's a very sad and funny movie. I think I have one chapter in the book where I reveal some of my mother's secret life, which was stunning and shocking to me at the time. And still, I was very happy for her that she was having this happy period of life and encouraged her to seek it because she'd been downtrodden and beaten down by dad for such a long time. And he thought he was very loving. He really thought he was a great husband and a great father. And he just didn't get it. He didn't get it. It was a kind of a habit of my grandfather and my father to ridicule. That was fun for them. Not so much fun to be the recipient. So I'm sure a lot of women of my age might identify with that.
I'm sure our audience would like to know, at least I would like to know, about your current work teaching charisma. What does it entail and how might we find you?
Well, you can find me at charismatizing.com. Or at playdate444 @gmail. I take folks who are introverted, maybe shy, who maybe have a very big public encounter to face, or a private one with a new date. And I imbue them with the charisma they have inside, but they don't feel the confidence to flex. And I utilize improv and voice training and movement training. In the last few years, I've mostly worked on Zoom, but for 10 years, I taught a class called Charismatizing Improvising, in which I could get people fully realized into their power, that it factor that actors know how to turn on and off. So I really enjoy these classes. I teach a half hour or an hour. Usually I like to meet with someone for an hour. I assign them a couple of things to get them to speak at length. And then we begin to, I'm pretty blunt, dissect the behavior that might be off-putting, the behavior that might be more inviting, more magnetizing. And I have different approaches with different people. Every person is a labyrinth of defenses, boundaries, and permissions. I work with people who are somewhat too exhibitionistic, so they don't know how to listen. They don't let themselves be affected by other people. So I can kind of modulate that too. As Marshall McLuhan so wisely said, the medium is the message. It's not just the word content, but it's the way you put it across that makes the difference as to whether you have a receptive audience or a resistant audience. So I use a lot of those precepts in my work. And it's just an improvisation. I really enjoy that work. I'm working with a young woman in Detroit who works for the Ford Foundation at the property that Henry Ford lived on. And she runs their restaurant and their museum and such. And she wants to have more of a strong voice with her employers. So one of the things I taught her was to make her sentences go down at the end rather than up, because she said everything with a question mark at the end of it. You'd say, "What's your name?" She'd say, "Debbie." And we got that question mark of self inhibition out of her voice and out of her delivery. And it's made a really big difference for her. So there's just little tricks like that I, as an actor and spokesperson for commercials years ago, kind of retained and apply. And again, people can write to me at playdate444@gmail.com if they're interested in asking questions or making an appointment to work on Zoom.
So, of all the roles that you've inhabited over the years, and I love when you wrote in your email to me the fluidity of personality that we actors, performers milk so constantly, right? Do you have one that is kind of the one you're most proud of, or the one that you find has had the most impact?
Well, the most impact on me anyway, because it was in the theater. There was a show called March of the Falsettos. And I think it ran on Broadway as Falsettos, but I was in an earlier version of it that debuted out in Los Angeles. And I got to break in this wonderful song called "I'm Breaking Down," about having a nervous breakdown. And that was peak for me. It was a hilarious song, a total showstopper, I think, for anyone who did it, but I was the first. And that was on stage, and only maybe 700 people a night saw that. It wasn't filmed. That would be illegal by Actors Equity standards. But I think that was a triumph for me. That was back in the 80s. I actually did Kirk Douglas's bar mitzvah show. He had a second bar mitzvah at the age of 82. And I played his daughter-in-law. We were squabbling all through the episode, but it was really fun to get to work with Kirk. He was a very vital man right up to the end. He was 82 when we shot this together. And it's a very dramatic role for me. His son, my husband, is dying of brain cancer, and our son no longer believes in God, doesn't want to be bar mitzvahed. So Kirk and the son have a twin bar mitzvah. It was a very moving, wonderful episode. Minor in my career, minor in people's imaginations or memories. But again, these are the moments I was really proud of, as an actor.
Well, that's so terrific. And Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really delightful hearing from you and talking with you. And for our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.